The ballroom at the River Oaks Country Club in Houston was decorated with elaborate arrangements of white orchids and champagne roses, as Patricia Montgomery meticulously scrutinized every detail of her son's engagement party. Her Jimmy Choo heels echoed against the marble floor, as she gestured frantically to the staff, pointing out invisible imperfections that only she could see. "Christopher deserves perfection," she muttered to herself, adjusting the position of a crystal goblet for the third time. Her only son, heir to the Montgomery fortune, was about to make what she considered the biggest mistake of his life, marrying Amanda Chen, a simple nurse at the Texas Medical Center. On the other side of town, Amanda was organizing medicines at the hospital where she had worked for 5 years, completely oblivious to the hurricane Patricia was planning to unleash. Her delicate hands, calloused by years of hard work, moved with precision between vials and ampules. The engagement ring, modest by Montgomery standards, glittered under the fluorescent lights of the hospital. "Amanda, you won't believe what happened to Mr. Martinez," said his co-worker Rachel, hastily approaching. "He woke up asking about you. He said you looked just like the nurse who looked after his father during the pandemic." Amanda smiled, remembering the elderly patient who had arrived 2 weeks ago after a stroke. "What a coincidence! But it wasn't me. I was working in another hospital at the time." What Amanda didn't know was that this coincidence would be the key to unraveling a much larger plot that threatened not only her marriage, but also the reputation of the entire Montgomery family. Christopher Montgomery arrived at River Oaks, driving his Tesla Model S, a choice his mother considered too modest for someone of his position. At 32, he had built his own fortune in the sustainable technology sector, independent of his family's real estate empire. His encounter with Amanda 2 years ago during a medical emergency for one of his employees had changed his life completely. "Mom, please tell me you didn't invite the entire Houston media to a simple engagement dinner," Christopher said as he entered the room, adjusting the navy blue tie Amanda had chosen for him. Patricia smiled, that practiced smile she had perfected over decades of social events. "Darling, the Montgomerys don't do anything simple. Besides, we need to show that we maintain our traditions, especially considering—" She stopped, letting the rest of the sentence hang in the air like a toxic cloud. "Considering what, Mom?" Christopher met her gaze, feeling the familiar tension grow between them. "That Amanda wasn't born in a golden cradle. That she actually works for a living." "Don't be dramatic, darling. I'm just worried about your happiness." Patricia touched her son's arm gently. "By the way, did you know that I received some interesting information about her past in San Antonio?" Christopher pulled away, his expression hardening. "Stop it, Mom. Your interesting information is always a poorly disguised attempt at sabotage." What Christopher didn't know was that while they were arguing, a folder was being delivered to his office documents that would reveal much more than just Amanda's past. Hidden among the pages were records of suspicious transactions by the Montgomery Foundation for aid to health professionals, an initiative set up during the pandemic and managed by her mother. Amanda arrived at the country club after her shift, her hair still tied up in the professional bun she wore at the hospital. Patricia watched with disapproval as her future daughter-in-law greeted the staff by name, chatting to them as if they were old friends. "Darling, you could have gone home to tidy up properly," Patricia commented, noticing a small stain on Amanda's white uniform. "Sorry, Patricia. We had a last-minute emergency and I didn't want to be late." Amanda smiled, genuinely trying to please her future mother-in-law, even after 2 years of veiled rejection. Mr. Martinez wasn't the only one who had noticed similarities between Amanda and another nurse. Over the course of the evening, 3 more guests commented on how she reminded them of someone who had looked after their relatives during the pandemic. Too many coincidences were beginning to pile up, forming a pattern that would soon prove devastating for the Montgomery family. In her private office at the club, Patricia typed furiously on her phone, sending messages to contacts carefully cultivated over the years. Her strategy to stop the wedding was in motion, but she didn't realize that her every action left a digital trail that her tech-savvy son could easily follow. As the guests arrived and the champagne flowed, three different stories developed simultaneously. Amanda genuinely in love, trying to navigate a social world that rejected her. Christopher discovering painful truths about his own family, and Patricia, weaving a web of lies that would eventually catch her in. Her own trap. Mr. Martinez had unknowingly planted the first seed of a revelation that would shake the very fabric of Houston's high society. The truth about the charitable fund and the fate of millions of dollars that should have helped families of health professionals was about to come out, and with it Patricia Montgomery's true nature would be exposed. The engagement night, planned to be a celebration of love between Christopher and Amanda, was quietly turning into the prelude to a storm that would change the lives of everyone involved forever. The white orchid's symbols of purity and new beginnings were mutely witnessing the unfolding of a story where truth and redemption would emerge from the depths of greed and prejudice. The documents on Christopher Montgomery's desk shone in the light of the office like pieces of an obscure puzzle. Bank statements, internal memos, and emails exchanged between his mother and various members of the Montgomery Foundation board formed a mosaic of irregularities that he could barely process. "This can't be right," he muttered, running his fingers through his dark hair as he examined a particularly suspicious transfer of $2.3 million to an account in the Cayman Islands. Patricia's digital signature was on every document like fingerprints left at a crime scene. Her phone vibrated. It was Amanda sending a photo of Mr. Martinez smiling in his hospital bed. "He's much better today, love you," the message read. Christopher felt his heart squeeze. How could his mother have embezzled money intended for people like Amanda, who risked their lives during the pandemic? At the Texas Medical Center, Amanda was facing her own set of challenges. Rachel, her co-worker, showed up at the nurse's station with a worried expression. "Amanda, you need to see this," said Rachel, showing her tablet. It was a Houston high society gossip blog with a sensationalist headline, "Opportunistic Nurse Seduces Montgomery Heir, Amanda Chen's Dark Past." The article was full of vicious insinuations about her time in San Antonio, suggesting that she had taken advantage of vulnerable patients to rise socially. Amanda immediately recognized the anonymous source behind the accusations. Patricia Montgomery's calculated style was unmistakable. "This is ridiculous," Amanda said, her hands shaking slightly as she handed the tablet back. "I would never—" "We know who you are, Amanda," Rachel interrupted her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "But you need to know that this is circulating in every social group in Houston." On the other side of town, Patricia was having lunch at the exclusive Brennan's of Houston with Vivian Blackwell, her longtime ally on the foundation's board. The two women shared not only secrets, but also responsibility for the embezzlement of charitable funds. "The rumors about the Chen girl are spreading, as expected," Vivian commented, delicately slicing her filet. "But Patricia, are you sure you've managed to erase all traces of the transactions?" Patricia adjusted her Cartier bracelet with a confident smile. "Christopher is too busy with his startup to investigate something like this. Besides, who would question a charity that helped so many people during the crisis?" What Patricia didn't know was that her son wasn't the only one investigating the case. Mark Henderson, an investigative journalist for the Houston Chronicle, had received an anonymous tip about irregularities at the foundation. Coincidentally, he was a friend of Mr. Martinez's father, and had closely followed the suffering of the families who never received the promised aid. Christopher decided to pay a surprise visit to the hospital that afternoon. He found Amanda in a rare moment of rest, sitting alone in the staff room. Her eyes were red, and she quickly wiped away a tear at the sight of him. "You saw the article, didn't you?" she asked softly. Christopher sat down next to her, taking her hands in his. "I did. And I also found out a lot more." He hesitated, weighing up each word. "Amanda, I need to tell you something about my mother and the foundation. But first tell me about your time in San Antonio." Amanda took a deep breath, her eyes meeting his. "I worked in the COVID ICU during the worst of times. We lost so many colleagues." A nurse, Maria Ramirez, left behind 3 young children. The Montgomery Foundation promised to help them, but his voice faltered. They never received anything, Christopher added, feeling his stomach turn. The silence between them was interrupted by Amanda's beep. Another emergency. Before leaving, she turned to Christopher. Mr. Martinez's father. He was Maria's patient. She looked after him until his last day. This revelation struck Christopher like a thunderbolt. Now all the pieces fell into place, the comments from the engagement guests, the suspicious transfers, his mother's obsession with destroying Amanda. It wasn't just about class prejudice, it was about fear. Fear that the truth about the embezzlement would come out. That night, as Houston prepared for bed, 3 people remained awake: Christopher organizing evidence to confront his mother Amanda, caring for patients, and trying to keep her dignity intact, and Mark Henderson finishing a story that would shake the foundations of Texan society. Patricia Montgomery slept peacefully in her mansion in River Oaks, unaware that her empire of lies was about to crumble. The wedding she had tried so hard to prevent would be the stage for her own exposure, and the truth, like a river dammed for too long, was about to overflow with devastating force. The full moon illuminated the city, casting long shadows over the Texas Medical Center where Amanda was finishing her shift. In the parking lot, she found a white rose on the windshield of her car, along with a note from Christopher. The truth always wins. Get ready for tomorrow. Mark Henderson's office at the Houston Chronicle buzzed with activity as he meticulously organized the evidence on his desk. Photographs of families devastated by the pandemic, testimonies from nurses, and a trail of documents linking Patricia Montgomery to the embezzlement of millions in charitable funds formed a devastating mosaic of corruption and greed. Mr. Henderson. A soft voice interrupted him. It was Lisa Ramirez, the eldest daughter of Maria, the deceased nurse. At 16, her eyes carried a weight beyond her years. I've brought the documents you asked for. Mark gently led Lisa to a chair. The papers she was carrying were her mother's last letters, including specific mentions of the Montgomery Foundation and promises of help that never materialized. Meanwhile, at the Texas Medical Center, Amanda was facing another kind of battle. The rumors spread by Patricia had infiltrated her professional environment. Whispers followed her down the corridors, and some patients even asked to change nurses. "Miss Chen," called out Dr. Richardson, the hospital director, "can we talk?" "In private." In the elegant office overlooking the Houston skyline, the director looked uncomfortable. "Amanda, you know we support our employees, but these allegations—" "They're lies," Amanda interrupted, her voice firm. "And I have a way of proving it." She opened her tablet, showing a series of emails exchanged with the hospital administration in San Antonio, all praising their exceptional work during the pandemic. Christopher, for his part, was diving deeper and deeper into his investigation. In his office at the startup, he discovered something even more disturbing: his mother was not alone in this scheme. Several prominent members of Houston society were involved, including Vivian Blackwell and other members of the foundation's board. "Mr. Montgomery," his assistant interrupted his thoughts. "Your mother is here." Patricia entered, impeccable in her Chanel ensemble, carrying a briefcase. "Darling, we need to talk about the wedding. I found some more things about Amanda that you need to see." Christopher stood up slowly, his eyes fixed on his mother. "No, Mom. You need to see some things I found." He turned his monitor, showing the incriminating documents. "How do you explain this?" The color left Patricia's face. This is out of context. You don't understand the complexities of running a foundation of this size." "Complexities?" Christopher laughed humorlessly. "Like embezzling money from families who have lost loved ones while saving other lives. Families like Maria Ramirez's." The name hit Patricia like a slap. "Like you." "Mr. Martinez's father, Mom. He was her patient. Amanda takes care of him now, unaware that you stole the future of the children of the nurse who saved his life." At the hospital, Amanda received an unexpected visit from Mark Henderson. The journalist explained his investigation, revealing how the case was connected to his own past. "My story is going to air tomorrow," Mark explained. "But I thought you deserved to know first. Your name will be cleared, Amanda, and the families will finally get justice." Amanda sat back, stunned by the revelations. All those families. That's why Patricia was so determined to keep me away from Christopher. She knew I could find out. In the evening, Christopher organized a dinner party at his apartment. Amanda, Mark, and Lisa Ramirez were there. On the table, in addition to the dishes prepared by his private chef, was a folder containing all the evidence. "Tomorrow," Christopher began, "we'll lay it all out. Mark's article combined with our legal evidence will ensure that the funds are recovered and properly distributed." Lisa, holding her mother's letters, had tears in her eyes. "She died believing that we had a guaranteed future, that we could continue studying." Amanda gently held the teenager's hand. "And now you will. Your mother was a hero, Lisa. She deserves the truth to come out." In her mansion, Patricia was receiving frantic calls from her accomplices. The circle was closing and everyone knew it. Vivian. Blackwell was threatening to expose everything if Patricia didn't find a way around the situation. "You promised that none of this would come out," Vivian shouted into the phone. "Do something." But for the first time in her life, Patricia Montgomery was at a loss. Her contacts were drifting apart. Her calls were no longer being returned, and her own son was about to expose her crimes. Night was advancing over Houston, and in different parts of the city, lives intertwined with lies and tragedies were preparing for a revelation that would change everything. Amanda, in her small apartment, looked at her engagement ring and thought of all the lives affected. Christopher, in his office, was finalizing the last legal details, and Patricia, alone in her mansion, was facing the imminent collapse of her empire of lies. The dawn would bring not only a new day, but also the beginning of a new era for everyone involved. The truth, like a long-contained force of nature, was about to be unleashed, sweeping away everything in its path, and leaving only the promise of redemption in its wake. The morning of the wedding dawned with a palpable tension hanging over Houston. At the River Oaks Country Club, staff were preparing the main hall under the watchful eye of Patricia Montgomery, who was trying to keep up appearances as her world silently fell apart. "The floral arrangements need to be perfect," she ordered. A nervous florist, her voice betraying a note of desperation that had never been there before. Her phone kept vibrating with messages from Vivian Blackwell and other members of the Foundation's board, all panicked by the rumors of an explosive report about to be published. In Amanda's apartment, Rachel was helping her friend with the final preparations for her dress. The Houston Chronicle lay open on the kitchen table, its headline reading, "High Society Scandal Millions, Embezzled from Charitable Fund for Health Professionals." "Are you ready for this?" Rachel asked, carefully adjusting Amanda's veil. "I've never been so ready in my life," Amanda replied, her determination reflected in the mirror. The simple but elegant dress she had chosen perfectly represented who she was, without ostentation, but with unwavering dignity. Christopher, in his office, was finalizing the last preparations with his lawyer, Michael Fitzgerald. "All the documents are in order," confirmed Michael, organizing a black folder. "The moment you give the signal, the police and prosecutors will be ready to act." "What about the families?" Christopher asked, thinking of Lisa Ramirez and the dozens of other people affected by his mother's scam. "The compensation fund is already structured. As soon as your mother is arrested, we can start distributing the money recovered." Mark Henderson watched as his report was shared thousands of times on social media. The calls kept coming, other journalists, affected families, and even repentant Foundation board members wanting to confess their roles in the scam. At the Texas Medical Center, Dr. Richardson called an emergency meeting with the staff. "As you may have seen in the news, our colleague Amanda Chen has been unfairly defamed. This hospital fully supports her integrity and dedication to patients." Patricia, in her suite at the club, received an unexpected visit from Vivian Blackwell. "We need to get away," Vivian whispered, her normally composed face now marked by panic. I have a private jet waiting at the private airport. No, Patricia replied, surprising even herself. I'm not going to lose my son. Not like this. The hours leading up to the ceremony passed as if in slow motion. The guests began to arrive, many of them whispering about the report and casting curious glances at the Montgomery family. Among them, discreetly positioned, were plainclothes officers waiting for the right moment to act. Lisa Ramirez, dressed in an elegant navy blue suit, sat near the altar with other families affected by the scam. Her presence was a silent reminder of the true cost of Patricia's greed. Amanda remained in a private room taking deep breaths and preparing not only for her wedding but for the role she would play in exposing the truth. Christopher had shared his plan with her the night before, and they both knew that their wedding would be more than a celebration of love. It would be a moment of justice. "Miss Chen," a soft voice called out. It was an elderly woman leaning on a cane. "I'm Gloria Martinez, Mr. Martinez's wife. I wanted to thank you personally for everything you've done for my husband, and for helping to expose the truth about what happened to Maria." Amanda hugged the lady, silent tears streaming down her face. Maria deserved justice. You all do. The final minutes before the ceremony were filled with frenetic activity. Patricia, in a last act of desperation, tried to convince the priest to cancel the wedding, citing irregularities in the documentation. Her attempt was interrupted by Christopher. "Enough, Mother," he said firmly, taking her arm. "It's time to face the consequences of your actions." The music started to play and the guests stood up. Amanda began her walk down the aisle, each step taking her not only towards her future husband, but also towards the truth that would forever change the lives of everyone present. Patricia Montgomery watched from the first pew, her face a mask of composure that barely concealed the terror in her eyes. She knew that this wasn't just her son's wedding, it was the moment when her empire of lies would finally crumble. The ceremony was about to begin, and with it a series of events that no one in that hall would ever forget. The truth, like a relentless wave, was about to sweep away everything in its path, leaving only the promise of justice and redemption in its wake. The moment Patricia Montgomery had been dreading had finally arrived. The ballroom of the River Oaks Country Club was filled with silent witnesses as Amanda, radiant in her wedding dress, walked down the center aisle. Christopher waited at the altar, his rigid posture denouncing the tension of what was about to happen. "If anyone knows of any impediment to this union, let them speak now or forever hold their peace," announced the priest, his words echoing through the hall. Patricia stood up abruptly, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her Hermes bag. "I object. This woman is not worthy of the name Montgomery." A murmur went through the assembly. Christopher stepped forward, his clear, firm voice cutting through the hubbub. "No, Mother. It is you who is not worthy of the name you bear." With a gesture he signaled to Michael Fitzgerald, who was handing out copies of the Houston Chronicle to strategically placed guests. Patricia's face paled when she saw her picture on the front page next to headlines detailing the embezzlement scheme. "For years," Christopher continued, his voice amplified by the altar microphone, "the Montgomery Foundation has pledged support to the families of healthcare workers who have lost their lives saving others. My mother not only stole that money, but tried to destroy the reputation of the woman who helped me discover the truth." Lisa Ramirez stood up, holding a framed photo of her mother in a nurse's uniform. "Maria Ramirez died taking care of patients like Mr. Martinez. Meanwhile, the money that was supposed to guarantee our education was siphoned off into offshore accounts." Vivian Blackwell tried to discreetly make her way to the exit, but was intercepted by two plainclothes detectives. "Ms. Blackwell, please accompany us," said one of them, showing his badge. Amanda remained serene in the aisle, her eyes fixed on Christopher, as he continued to expose the truth. Around her, familiar faces from the hospital, Dr. Richardson, Rachel, and other colleagues nodded in silent support. "The documents I have in my hands," Christopher held up a folder, "prove that more than $15 million have been embezzled. money that should have gone to scholarships, medical treatment, and support for grieving families. Patricia tried to regain control of the situation. "Christopher, you don't understand. Everything I did was to protect our family, our legacy." "No, Mom," he interrupted her. "You did it out of greed. And you used Amanda as a scapegoat because you knew that she, as a nurse, could find out the truth about Maria Ramirez and the other families." Mark Henderson, discreetly filming everything from the back of the room, smiled as he saw his investigation culminate in this moment of public justice. His anonymous sources, including repentant Foundation employees, had contributed to this outcome. "Officers!" Christopher called out, and more police emerged from the crowd. "My mother and her associates are being formally charged with fraud, embezzlement, and defamation." Patricia, finding herself cornered, made her last desperate attempt. "Amanda, darling," her voice now honeyed, "we can sort this out as a family. There's no need to—" "Mrs. Montgomery," Amanda finally spoke, her voice firm, "I've spent the last 2 years trying to win your approval while you tried to destroy my reputation. But it was never about me, was it? It was about your fear that I would discover your crimes." Mr. Martinez, in his wheelchair pushed by his wife, Gloria, approached the altar. "Maria Ramirez saved my life," he declared, his voice breaking. "And, while Amanda took care of me, you stole the future of Maria's children." The officers approached Patricia, handcuffs in hand. She looked around, seeking support among her former social allies, but found only disapproving stares and smartphones, recording her fall. "Christopher," she tried one last time. "I'm your mother." "And I'm your son," he replied, "who chose truth and justice over the money and appearances you value so much." As Patricia was escorted out of the hall, Amanda held Christopher's hand. The priest, who had watched everything in silence, snorted. Should we continue with the ceremony?" Christopher looked at his fiancée, finding in her eyes the same strength that had inspired him to expose the truth. "Yes," he replied. "Today is not just about justice. It's about love, truth, and new beginnings." The guests returned to their seats, many still processing the events they had just witnessed. Lisa Ramirez smiled through her tears, knowing that her family would finally have the support they had been promised. Dr. Richardson discreetly removed Amanda's resignation that Patricia had demanded he prepare. Amanda and Christopher exchanged vows under a new kind of silence, no longer laden with secrets and tension, but with respect and admiration for the couple who chose to stand up to corruption and fight for the truth. As the rings were exchanged, Mark Henderson sent his latest update to the newspaper. The next day's headline was already set: "Justice at the Altar, How a Marriage Exposed One of Houston's Biggest Fraud Schemes." Christopher and Amanda's love had not only survived Patricia's attempts at sabotage, it had grown stronger through them becoming a catalyst for justice and change. As the couple sealed their commitment with a kiss, those present witnessed not just a marriage union, but the beginning of a new era for the Montgomery family, and for all families who would finally receive the support they were due. The ballroom of the River Oaks Country Club, which minutes before had witnessed Patricia Montgomery's public display, now vibrated with a different energy. As the police led Patricia and Vivian Blackwell out of the venue, Christopher and Amanda stood at the altar, their intertwined hands symbolizing not only their union, but the victory of truth over lies. "By the powers vested in me," continued the priest, regaining his composure, "I now pronounce you man and wife." The applause that followed was not just for the couple's union, but a collective celebration of justice. Lisa Ramirez, still holding her mother's photo, was the first to rise, her tears now of joy and relief. Mark Henderson, from the back of the room, was sending his latest updates to the newsroom. His camera had captured every moment of the confrontation, every expression of shock and indignation on the faces of Houston's elite as they discovered the true nature of one of their most respected members. "The story will air in 15 minutes, he whispered to Christopher during the reception. "All the families will be mentioned, and the restitution process is already being documented. On the dance floor, Amanda was dancing with Mr. Martinez, who had insisted on getting up from his wheelchair for a brief waltz. "Maria would be proud," he said softly. "You have brought light to the darkness she fought to the end." Christopher was watching the scene when Dr. Richardson approached. "You know," the hospital director began, "when your mother tried to pressure me into firing Amanda, something told me there was more to the story. She was too desperate." "Desperation has always been her weakness," replied Christopher. "The fear of losing control, of having her secrets exposed." On the other side of town in Houston's Central Police Station, Patricia Montgomery was facing the reality of her situation. Sitting in an interrogation room, she watched her reflection in the glass as detectives presented evidence after evidence of her fraudulent transactions. "Ms. Montgomery," said Detective Lauren Carter, "we have records of transfers to at least 12 offshore accounts. The more you cooperate, the better it will be for your situation." Back at the party, Amanda gathered all the families affected by the scam in a private room at the club. "This is just the beginning," she declared, her voice firm despite her emotion. "Starting today, we're going to transform the Montgomery Foundation into something that truly honors the sacrifice of your loved ones." Christopher entered the room carrying a folder of documents. "We've already started the restructuring process. Each family will receive not only the original amount intended for them, but also the interest accrued over the last few years." Lisa Ramirez stood up. "It's not just about the money," she said, her voice breaking. "It's about recognition, about honoring people like my mother, who gave their lives caring for others." The evening progressed, and the guests began to leave, each taking with them not only the memories of an extraordinary wedding, but also the awareness of having witnessed a historic moment of social transformation in Houston. Rachel, who had remained by Amanda's side throughout the ceremony, was helping to organize the last details when she noticed something interesting. The white orchid arrangements so meticulously chosen by Patricia were being donated to the Texas Medical Center, a symbol of renewal, Amanda explained, "to remind us that even the most difficult situations can give rise to something beautiful." Mark Henderson published his full report at midnight. Within minutes, the story went viral on social media, generating an outpouring of support for the families and a national discussion about the need for greater transparency in charitable foundations. A week after their wedding, Christopher and Amanda postponed their honeymoon to establish the foundation's new board, now renamed the Ramirez Montgomery Foundation, to support healthcare professionals. Lisa Ramirez was named an honorary member representing the benefiting families. Mr. Martinez was discharged from the hospital but continued to attend board meetings as a consultant, his personal experience serving as a bridge between the painful past and the institution's promising future. Patricia Montgomery was sentenced to 12 years in prison, with the possibility of a reduction upon full restitution of the embezzled amounts. Vivian Blackwell and other members of the former board made plea bargains exposing an even larger network of corruption in Houston's high society. But the real transformation took place in the hearts of those affected. The Texas Medical Center established a mentoring program in Maria Ramirez's name, allowing experienced nurses to mentor new professionals. Amanda became the program's first coordinator. Christopher, watching his wife work tirelessly to rebuild what his mother had destroyed, realized that the real Montgomery legacy was not in the millions in bank accounts or social prestige, but in the ability to make a difference in people's lives. One quiet afternoon, 6 months after their wedding, Amanda found a letter addressed to her in the hospital reception. It was from Patricia, written from prison. "I tried to protect a legacy built on lies, while you created a new one founded on truth. Take good care of my son. And if you can forgive a woman who took too long to understand what really matters." Amanda kept the letter on her desk next to the wedding photo, where she and Christopher were smiling, surrounded by all the families they had helped. The truth had been costly, but its price had brought an even greater reward, the chance to build something truly meaningful from the ashes of an empire of lies. And so in a hospital in Houston, life went on fairer, more honest, and infinitely more hopeful than before.